you know, you also have to find places that are kosher. So in Israel, it's great. And then we went to another place called Chumus Eliyahu. So it's like also a gas station, and we just yeah. Kosher? I guess Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah.
I don't like kosher. Just go right. Go Dunkin' Donuts, you just get right.
What's their slogan? They keep America driving, so
Yeah.
literally in New York.
Now it's going, Dunkin'.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, really? They took the name out.
Yeah, the sign
Oh my
says
God.
Dunkin'.
I didn't even notice that. You're so right. But
Yeah,
There's the ones on Dunkin'. Yeah.
yeah, they changed all the signs.
That's when you know you've achieved like such, like.
Saturation, market saturation. Yeah.
Top of mind status where you don't even need the full name. Yeah, that's amazing.
All right, page 30. So just a very brief recap. We're talking about the greatness of Torah, and the question that was posed was, why is it that our sages say that one who has time to study Torah and doesn't do so is subject to severe, has some pretty harsh terms for them. And yet someone who doesn't have time, exempts themselves or fulfills their obligation just with studying one chapter in the morning, one chapter in the evening. It seems like a broad contrast. So to understand that, amongst the other questions that we asked at the beginning of the discourse or about Purim and so on, so he quoted the teaching and the passages from the verses that say that the Torah is mashal hakadmoni, which is a primordial analogy, which means that whenever you understand something at one layer, and then you understand it at a deeper layer, the first layer of understanding basically it becomes like the analogy for the deeper layer. Like it says that King Solomon was the wisest of all men. He gave 3,000 parables. That was his greatness. The question is, what's his greatness of being 3,000 parables? The idea is not 3,000 parables, 3,000 layers of understanding, right? So in a certain sense, I'll deviate for a second. You know, the idea that I think you start like really growing up when you stop thinking that your newest runaway child, let's just make sure that kid's safe. Yeah.
Like Alexander.
Oh boy.
So, you know, we suddenly get like new awareness about ourselves. Oh, wow. Like, you know, I finally figured something out about myself. Right. And then yeah. And then you think, okay, now I've got it all figured out. Now that I understood this part of myself, now I got it all figured out. It's all going to be smooth sailing from here. And then, you know, some time goes by and then you realize, nah, that's not enough. There's more there. And then you have this next awareness, right? At a certain point, you realize like, this is just the way it's going to be. There is no destination. I mean, the destination is 120, but you know, the destination is not really what it's about. It's about the journey, and it's about constantly exposing layers. So when what you've discovered when you were 20, like this awareness that you had about yourself is really just, it's just really a parable for what you're going to discover later. What's a parable? A parable is you have a layer of understanding that tells you about something else. Well, right now it might be the knowledge, but as you evolve, you realize that was just a parable. That was just like kind of the beginning of the coming into focus. So now spiritually, one of the benefits is what the Talmud is telling us of studying Torah in this world, which is God's wisdom, so that when we enter into the next world, we are suddenly exposed to something that we have a familiarity with. In other words, in this world, we study the parable. We come to the next world, we get the analog, and we say, oh, that's familiar. I didn't really understand it before, but now because I understood the parable, now I understand the analog. That's the idea. So therefore, the Talmud is not giving us harsh judgment. The Talmud is telling us something very simple. If God affords you, if God limits your ability because of the circumstances of your life, that you can only study Torah a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, then that means that that's adequate for you for what's allocated for you in the next world. And like we discussed last time, I believe the meaning here is that it's not about more or less. Each person has their unique journey in life, and it could be that the journey on this world is going to be very limited in terms of your ability to study Torah, but the reward for that is exponential, right? Versus the other person who is not going to get such a big revelation in the next world, but in order for them to get that revelation, they have to be totally invested in this world. And if they don't, then the result is that they don't get the opportunity to, if you don't study the parable, you can't understand the analog, right? So the Torah is not telling, the Talmud's not telling us like there's this great punishment for you. It's just, it's a consequence. If you don't understand the parable, you're not going to understand the analogy. It's like if you try to, like you open up a book and you want to get to the messaging of the book, but you don't do the legwork, you don't really get the messaging, right? You can't live life on 2 times speed, right? You gotta go through it. That's how you get the experience of life. Okay. So with that understanding, we're gonna go back to deepening the understanding about the Torah. So chapter 2, page 30. So one of the fundamental ideas in Jewish mysticism is that if we look at the sequence of things, and in fact, if you read about the covenant between the parts, between Abraham and God, and then the revelation of God to Moses at the burning bush, there's a common theme, and the theme is that the suffering in Egypt is a prelude to the revelation at Sinai. In other words, there was a sequence here that needed to happen in that order. What's the sequence? So the Midrash tells us that Egypt is a Kur HaBarzel. It's like a smelting pot, right? So the Jewish people, in order to be at a spiritual state, to be able to receive the revelation at Sinai, they had to be cleansed, right? They had to work through it. I spoke to somebody last week. It was a very, very fascinating conversation. He said to me that there's so much focus today on cleansing, right? Healing. And the focus needs to be, instead of focusing so much on the cleansing and the healing, is to focus on the light. You know, people are so caught up in removing blockages, which he said is an exile mindset. It's a very limiting mindset. I have this problem, I got that problem. If I just move the problem away, then the light will come out. Instead of saying, I have light, let the light shine. If you let the light shine, no, there won't be any blockages, right? Right? When you open up the dam, nothing holds it back. Like all the rocks and the stuff that's, collected on the side just gets washed away. So the nature of things, though, is that in an exile structure, the exile is a preparation, and that's what Egypt was. Egypt was a preparation for the revelation at Sinai. They had to go through that journey of cleansing in Egypt in order for them to be able to receive the revelation at Sinai. So it says like this: the Jewish people merited the giving of the Torah through their suffering in the exile of Egypt. With mortar and bricks. Right? The Torah tells us that they toiled with mortar and bricks, building these cities for Pharaoh and so on. So what was the result of that? The result of working with the mortar and bricks is vikdimo nasel nishma. That when God came to them and said, "Do you want the Torah?" They said, "We will do And then they said, we will listen. First, we're going to do, then we're going to listen. That is a tremendous statement of humility, right? To respond, right? The old joke, when you say jump, I'll ask you how high after I jump, right? That's a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice. God comes to you and says, will you take my Torah? Yes. No questions asked. We're going to do it. What's in there? You'll tell us afterwards, right? Now, how do you come to a place to have that kind of dedication and humility to God? That's the result of the work in Egypt. They were spiritually broken down. They became spiritually vulnerable. So there's a fundamental principle, and that is that the Torah is God's chachma, it's God's wisdom. And chachma, by definition, the word chachma, we've had it in other discourses, is koach ma. It's a power of what? In other words, what does chachma say? What is the question that chachma says is, what is it? It wants to know, what is it? Right? That's the nature of a wise person, is they're always asking what? What's the nature of understanding? By definition, understanding is about me. There's already ego involved. I need to understand. I need to use my comprehension to understand what's being taught to me, what I'm experiencing. It says that the Torah is God's chachma. It's God's wisdom. And God, Dr. Rebbe quotes in Tanya from the Zohar, that God only rests in a place of humility. Where the Talmud says that God says of the arrogant, there's not enough space for the two of us here. How does the old Western go, right? Not enough space in this town for the two of us, right? God says there's not enough space for the two of us, and therefore arrogance is not a means to be able to receive Torah. To receive Torah, you have to have humility. So here, this is the big event. God's going to reveal himself at Sinai. The Jewish people need to show up with that kind of dedication, with that real humility. How do they get to a place of humility, right? So life does things for us along the way where we break down our arrogance. Hopefully, as we get older, we stop being so stubborn and so arrogant. With wisdom, actually, comes humility, right? With wisdom comes humility. We become more receptive to what's available to us. We stop thinking that we understand everything. All the gurus today. Be curious, right? Don't take it in. Oh, I got it. Move on. No, be curious. Did you understand it? Do you understand the other person? Do you understand that experience? What's really going on, right? And this is the idea of preceding, bottom of page 31, preceding we will do to we will hear. In other words, this is the meaning. What's the novelty? We always say, the Jewish people, they said that we will do and we will hear. What's so great about that? Because it's bechinas a bittul. It's an expression of humility. The humility of this is an expression of humility, that God says, I want to give you my Torah. I want to give you my commandments. So what do you say? You say, yes. Whatever you tell me, I'm prepared to do. That means that there's no me anymore. I don't have any personal interest anymore. Right? When somebody asks you to do something, immediately you start evaluating. Do I want to be a nice person? Some people have a tendency to automatically want to say yes, and then you start evaluating. Am I just codependent? So I say yes to everybody. And some people don't have a nice streak, so they say, well, I have to break myself, right? So you begin, there's this whole analysis. What happens if you remove that whole analysis and the answer was yes? Now some of you are thinking, but maybe that's not such a good thing. No, let's just run with it, okay? Somebody asks you to do something, the answer is yes. That means that anytime you're going to have a thought to want to do otherwise, you have to put that aside. That's essentially what the Jewish people said. We will do whatever you tell us. Little did they know there were 613 commandments coming. We will do whatever you say, which means we're making God's will our own will, as the Mishnah in Ethics says, make his will your will. Doesn't mean to force ourselves to make his will our will. It means that we're so nullified to God's will that his will becomes our will. I say in relationships, we have the biblical commandments, we have the rabbinic commandments, and we have custom. Good morning. There's a nice teaching that the biblical commandments is when your spouse says to you, go and do this, right? So you listen. The rabbinic commandments are when your spouse says to you, it smells in here. And you get the message and you go, you take the garbage out. Custom is when your spouse doesn't even have to say anything. You're so connected that you know already what your spouse wants, right? What does that mean? You're so connected. The integration, the sense of there's no me, right? If you have to tell me to do something that I should know is obvious, that means that there's you and there's me. So if you tell me, I'm obedient. So I'm going to subjugate myself to your will. But when we're so connected, I know what you want. And that's, again, it's not an evaluation in this context. What we're saying is that that's the nature of the dedication the Jewish people made when they said, we will do and we will hear. They were basically saying is, I'm willing to not have any will except your will, God. V'zeu bechinas avoda. So it's very interesting when we talk about serving God, right? There's a concept of divine service. What does it mean, divine service? Divine service is this act. Divine service isn't prayer or lighting Shabbat candles or keeping kosher. It's not what it's about. It's about how transparent are you? How aligned are you with God's will? And the reality is it's very difficult to be aligned with God's will. Because as we said many times, when you wake up in the morning, your first consciousness is me, right? So the work that we have to do, and again, the destination is 120. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. The work we have to do is to recognize that I need to make God's will my will. Right? Why do I take up so much space? Because God's will is not in my consciousness. My will is in my consciousness. Again, it's by divine design, but the objective is to work through that, to stop putting myself always first and put God first. That even when a thought arises about me, to say, okay, but what does God want? So this is the meaning of the verse, you shall serve him, you shall serve him. It means to work on the humility. A servant, one who's in service, right? A true servant does not have an independent thought process. A true servant does exactly what their master asks of them. And the Jewish people, so because the Jewish people said, we will do, the result of that is v'nishma, that they were able to listen, to study, to comprehend, to actually be the recipient of God's revelation, right? It's kind of funny. We think that when we're subjugating ourselves to God's will, like we're doing some great thing. It's actually in our interest. If we can align ourselves with God's will, we get God's revelation. We experience the divine. So the thing is, we have to prioritize spiritual service over material selfish interest, right? It always works out that way. After you put in a good day of hard work, feel good about yourself, even though you put in the hard work. Yes, it would have been more fun to sit on the beach, and there's a time for that. But when you do the work, you feel good, right? So like the Mishnah says, what's the reward for a mitzvah? The reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. It's the connection itself, right? So when we have the humility and we do what God wants, then we experience God. And there's nothing greater than that. In order to arrive to this level of humility, I like the word alignment, to arrive to this level of alignment, to be able to say we will do before we will listen, hayu adayim bebechinas katnus, while the Jewish people were still in Egypt, they were still in essentially a lower spiritual level. So how did they arrive? How is it possible to arrive at such a high level? So the Rebbe here is splitting the baby a little bit. He's telling us that on the one hand, Egypt served in a capacity to really break down and refine the people so they were more capable of being aligned. But nonetheless, even with all of that, they still were not really ready to be at a place where they were able to dedicate and commit themselves in this level of alignment. So therefore, there needed to be one more step. What was that step? And remember, it's very important how he's building this up here. The objective of this next step was to break down the resistance, to open ourselves up with true vulnerability, to let God's will be our will. So what did God do? As we learned earlier in the discourse, God lifted up the mountain over them. What is this idea of God lifting the mountain up over them? So until now, we didn't really tell you the secret of what this mountain is really all about. In a literal understanding of the mountain, it's a little frightening. God takes a mountain and he says, either accept the Torah or I'm going to bury you here. But what's this mountain? Why a mountain? Why does the Midrash use the notion of a mountain? So he answers, we have the notion of a mountain being something big and powerful and overwhelming. What is the big and powerful and overwhelming? The big and powerful and overwhelming is God's love. God showed the Jewish people such love, such a profound expression of love, that it was not in their capacity to refuse him. Somebody reached out to me last week and asked me about, they're struggling with something, a family member, and they wanted to know what my opinion was about interventions. So I gave them my opinion, but I was thinking, what is an intervention really? It's really a bunch of family and friends getting together and telling the individual, we love you. Even if the external dimensions are either get your act together or we're gonna disown you or disconnect or kick you out or whatever the harsh consequences are, that's not really the point. The point is, look at all these people that love you, right? Why are you so resistant? We're here for you. We want you to be healthy. We want you to get yourself better, right? It's love. And when you face that kind of love, it touches you on such a deep level that goes beyond all the stuff that somebody might be holding. In the case of an intervention, their addictions, their unhealthy behaviors, whatever, it cuts through all of that. God lifting the mountain over the people was God saying, I love you so much. He says, quotes from Song of Songs, it's God's right hand embracing us. The right always expresses kindness and love. God loves us so much, and he says, I want you to take my Torah. Will you take it? And of course the answer is yes. How can you refuse that? Right? So one of the challenges in relationships is that people get their stuff gets in the way. Right? Two people get together from a place of profound love and connection. And then as time goes on, the intense feelings of love and connection begins to dissipate, not because it dissipates, but because all the other stuff gets in the way. And that's why it's important to constantly nurture the core of the relationship, right? When you stop nurturing the core of the relationship loses that fire goes out and you're just stuck with the external stuff, and nobody needs that. You don't need, right? Nobody needs to live in a relationship where they're constantly butting heads. That's not why we are married. We get married because of the core connection. In the journey, we deal with the external stuff and we refine some of that stuff, but really all of it is a journey to let go of the stuff that we hold on to. If we were able to be in the language of IFS, if we're able to be in self, or if we're able to let the love manifest itself, whatever resistances the other person has and whatever resistances we have will dissipate, and what's experienced is just the core and the love. So God shows up here and he just showers us with love. That's what the meaning of the mountain is. It's this big expression of love that we can't help but accept. This is this mountain signifies the revelation of God's love, supernal love upon Israel. So even here in the south, they say a lot, the Lord loves you. Jews are afraid of that. They're afraid to hear the Lord loves you because they think it's Christian. But actually, it comes right from here. In Malachi chapter 1, verse 2, God says, Ahafti eschem amar Hashem. I love you, declares God. So it comes from our book. God loves you. God loves, embraces the Jewish people and surrounds them from every side. That's the idea of a mountain. And that's why the mountain is shaped like a tub in the Medrash, right? It says that the mountain was like a tub. The idea is that it embraced them. Even their backs. What does it mean, their backs? The back is the whatever negative self-talk you have about yourself, God loves that too. Right? Whatever the front stuff, the face stuff, of course God loves us, right? There are in Hebrew, how do we say a face? Aponim, ashein aponim, right? Aponim is a face. The word panim is the word panimiut. It means the inside. So the inside of us is lovable. What about the backside of us? The stuff that we're not so we keep behind us. We don't try to show it too much. God loves that too. We're embraced in our totality. To the extent that the Alter Rebbe elaborates this elsewhere, but he says God embraces us so much, right? You know, my kids joke, how do you, there's so much fakeness in the world today. There's YouTubes about how people laugh. There's like a whole YouTube of like all the different types of laughs, which are the real ones, which is the little chuckle, right? And then there's also how people hug, right? So there's the classic tap. You hug and you start tapping, right? Hug someone, hold them. An embrace is to be held. You want to hold someone. You're trying to create space for them. Don't tap. What are you tapping? Like buddies at a baseball game, hit the other guy on the back. No, hold someone. The Alter Rebbe says that when your embrace is real, you don't let them go. I mean, there's at a certain point you got to let them go, otherwise you get arrested. But you embrace someone, like give them a good hug, hold them. That's what you want them to feel held. You know where the notion expresses itself with children. When a child is having a real difficulty getting centered, getting anchored, and you hold the child, you hold them really tight and you don't let them go. Even when they try to break out. I'm not talking about when a kid is in the middle of a real spaz, but when a kid is like really having a rough time, you hold them tight, and then eventually just relax. They lean into it, right? Because they feel held, they feel protected, they feel loved, they feel cared for, right? So that's what we're trying to do. That's what God is doing to us. He's embracing us, the totality of who we are. All of you. And in fact, where does the arms go? They go around the back. We don't hold the person on the shoulder. Hold them around the back. I'm taking all of you in. I love all of you. The good, the bad, and the ugly. You're all part of my love. This is what God says to us. And in the embrace, in the embrace, you're compelled to stay face to face. Right? So what's the messaging there? I take all of you in, and all of you are part of my panim el panim, my face-to-face love. I love you. All of you is part of my internal love. In other words, there's not levels here. I love everything about you, means the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that's all equally where my love lives. That through the sublime love, it gets awakened within us, the response, right? When you love someone, you're going to awaken a response of love from them. Until they reach the level at which they declare, we will do before we will hear. Like King Solomon says, that just as water reflects a face to another, so too the heart of man is to another man. Who are these mans that King Solomon is talking about? Pirish, Leiv ha'adam elyon. We're talking about the face of God, the supernal man, the man that Ezekiel saw in his prophecy when he ascended to heaven. It says that he saw on the throne that which appeared to be the image of a man, so that in Kabbalah we refer to that experience as what's known as Adam Ha'elyon, the supernal man. God forbid it's not a physical man in any way, but it's the image of a man, which means the reflection of us to God and God to us. Which is indicated which is how loisem shesagidim al adam. I know chinas adam shabiyah k'meshakasav demus pnei pnei adam. So the 248. So this is a deep Kabbalistic idea that the man is made up of 248 major organs and arteries, major organs, and 365 veins and arteries. And so in Kabbalah, we say that the king, meaning God, has these 248 organs and 365 veins and arteries. Again, not God forbid that God has any likeness to a human, but just as we described in an earlier class that this, maybe it was last week, that the sweetness of sugar, right, is the attribute of chesed, the attribute of kindness, manifests itself in the sweetness of sugar, right? Or even more abstractly, in the sweetness of a person, right? So the kindness, as it descends into this world, takes on a physical manifestation. But if you went to chesed, if you went into the supernal worlds and you looked at chesed, it would have no properties. It would be a spiritual energy. So God's qualities that are divided in these categories of 248 and 365, when they descend into this world, they become the 248 positive commandments and the 365 negative commandments. And they make up the totality of the human relationship with the divine.
Is there a correlation between the 365 and the number of days in a year?
There is, but not specifically and not as explicitly in this context. The analogy here specifically is much more. I'm going to elaborate on the analogy or the parallel. What is the function of, if you were to say, who is the person? What makes you you? I'll help you. Don't worry.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, besides the physicality, I would say the emotional soul center.
No, I want you to be on the physical side.
Oh, okay.
Where do you show up in the world?
In my human body.
In what part of your human body?
Are you saying the way you experience me or the way I experience me being me?
Either.
I would have to revert back then into like the way I feel like I show up in the world.
I'm not asking a deep question. I want to be very, very basic.
Okay, just my body.
Just what part of your body?
I have to pick one part.
No, you can pick multiple parts.
Okay. My eyes.
Good.
Brain.
Good.
Hands, my feet.
Good.
mouth,
Good.
ears.
Good. I don't know all the names of the anatomy, but there's a vein that probably runs. You didn't say your sciatic nerve.
I did not.
You did not. Nor did you say the sinew that is in the back of your calf, right? Right. You didn't talk about the car, right? So you talked about all your organs, because what identifies us in the world is our organs. I'm a runner. I'm a writer. I'm an artist. I'm a whatever. What do you do with your eyes? That's a profession. I don't know. But ophthalmologist, thank you. I'm a thinker. I need to eat. I need to smell. I need to hear. My heart needs to pump. I feel, right? These are all organs. The organs are what make up the identity of the person. In other words, where does a relationship live? The relationship lives in the organs, in the actions. How do you take care of your body? Take care of these organs through positive actions. You eat fish oil and you exercise and you don't eat too much red meat, et cetera, and you stay healthy. What is the function of the veins and arteries? It's to move oxygenated blood through the body so that the body has the energy, right? How do you take care of your veins and arteries? By not getting in the way. Don't do things that interfere with the flow of energy in your body. Don't clog your arteries, don't block your veins, and everything's going to be fine. No one needs your help with the veins and arteries. Just stay out of the way, right? So in our relationship with God, the 248 organs, the 248 positive commandments is where our relationship lives. The function of the negative commandments is not to interfere. So we spoke about this yesterday in the class, is that actually the negative commandments are higher. Because when you're connecting with someone through positive action, you're already defining what your relationship is. You're connecting with them on a relationship level, on a relatable level, right? When you just are, meaning without blockages, when you just are without blockages, then the connection is the totality of the other being. So ultimately, the negative commandments are actually higher than the positive commandments. But the way you fulfill them is by not doing them, by not transgressing, not getting in the way. This goes to what we said before. Let the energy out. Just don't get in the way of the energy and everything's going to be great, right? So all of this is to say that when King Solomon says that like a face reflects a face in the water, so too is the heart of man to man. So it's a two-way street. It's both God expressing himself to us and us responding to God. And conversely, us expressing ourselves to God and God responding to us. Here, the focus is on God expressing himself to us. That's the mountain, the love that God is expressing to us. And the response that we give to God is our desire and yearning to be connected with God. In other words, when the Jewish people said, we will do and we will hear, this was their response. They're reflecting back to God the love that God expressed to them. There's a little notion, this concept of internal family systems, which is a form of therapy that's become much more commonplace, known by its acronym IFS, which sees the body as the emotional components of the body as a variety of different parts, right? And then there's the self. And the idea is that when we can differentiate the different parts within the body, like what am I experiencing right now? Am I experiencing a self or a part? What happens is a part has these, experiences from childhood and so on and so forth. And when they get activated, so there's a part of us, a protector, that comes out to protect that part. And then what ends up happening is the protector shoots off some negative energy towards whatever's causing the irritation, which typically hits the other person's part, and they pull their protector out, and the two protectors go at it, and the problem isn't solved, and you just have a shouting match, or what they like to call a parts party. So when you can differentiate within yourself, and if your partner or whoever it is that you're dealing with also can make that differentiation, then you recognize that there's a part, you address what the part's needs are, the protector can stay at bay, and then the self can show up. And here's the fascinating thing, that when you can go to yourself, when you can go to self, when you can express yourself from a place of self, and you stay the course, inevitably you will activate the self in the other. So even if you get activated in a part, and you're aware that it's a part, you don't respond by activating your protector, and you respond from a place of self, the other person may not respond initially from a place of self because they're activated. They're actually activated from the fact that you're communicating from a place of self. It could be. In other words, that's their part that's not familiar with that or doesn't like that level of transparency, whatever. But if you stay the course, because what ends up happening is one part gets activated, and you say, okay, I got this one, and then you move to self, and then you try to respond from self, and then you get a negative feedback, another part of you gets activated. You got to keep that one also at calm. So if you can do that and respond from a place of self, you're going to activate the other person's self. That's the nature of things, right? And in plain English is if your spouse says something to you and you don't respond in a negative way, and you say, listen, darling, or listen, honey, or how, I don't mean this make this a male-female one-directional thing. I just happen to be a male. And you respond from a place of self and say, listen, honey, I heard what you said. You know, I really love you. Whatever, fill in the blank, whatever the result of that is. And it's all about them. And I love you and you're great. And I didn't mean, and I didn't this and I that. You're going to activate the self part of them also. In other words, whatever's triggering them is also going to fall aside. Now, even if initially they get triggered by your response, you say, I hear that and I validate that, but I really love you. I really, whatever, you know, you got to play but stay at the core. Eventually you're going to get that response. And that's what King Solomon is telling us, is like when you look in the water, what looks back at you is a face. If you show up with your pnimius, if you show up with your panim, kamayim hapanim hapanim, like water reflects a face. If you show up from your inside, you can't help but activate the other person's inside.
The cherubim, when they are with faces of children looking at each other. Two toddlers meet in a playground, they automatically start playing. But as you get older, when you're adolescents, teenagers, adults, it's a completely different experience. There's so much
Stuff gets in the way.
Get in the way, but the two toddlers automatically start playing. If
Yeah.
you notice, you know.
They don't have the nature of children. It changes when children begin to develop a sense of self. When the ego starts moving in, then they don't resolve their conflicts that quickly anymore. And because the younger they are, the less the ego is in the way. So they're naturally in a place of pnimius. They're naturally in a place of their essence.
We're trying to do the same thing, get back to our.
Exactly.
to ourself.
We're trying to get back. It's a hard journey. Yes.
Trouble a little bit by the mountain story,
Yeah, please.
even though it shows love. Alternatively, and maybe the answer is in the realm, we can't know God's. We can't, it's beyond our understanding. Alternatively, he could have shown a vision of the Garden of Eden and how great it's going to be if you nasa Inish, as opposed to what on some level is still a threat. Why the negative approach instead of what seems to me could cajole them into obedience, you know?
So I'm going to repeat your question. The question is that why didn't God, instead of holding this mountain over their head, show them the reward for keeping the Torah, for accepting the Torah? I'm going to ask you a question. Why did you hear, I don't mean this as a critical question, but why did you hear that God turning the mountain over them and expressing this great expression of love was a negative?
But the implication was, if you don't, then this is going to be falling down on your head.
Okay, so you have to read into the text, just like we gave the whole explanation of that one who doesn't study, one who has the ability to study Torah and doesn't, that there's all these severe consequences. Instead of reading that as a harsh punishment, read it as a natural flow. In other words, there's a result. God is saying to the Jewish people, look, I love you so thoroughly. If you can't respond to that love by loving me back and taking my Torah in its totality, then something fundamentally wrong here. This is the end of it. In other words, what was the result? Just like when you hear the Medrash on its basic level, you understand, of course, they're going to take the Torah, right? Of course, they're going to accept it. Because the nature of things are that when God shows you love, of course, you're going to respond to that love. By the way, had God shown them the reward for keeping the Torah, what's he playing to there? He's playing to their ego. Yeah, to their self-interest. And of course there's reward. Of course there's punishment. But hopefully we don't keep the Torah just because there's a prize at the end. We don't want that to be our identity. We keep the Torah because a mitzvah is an opportunity for connection. That's what we're into. We want to connect with God. So that's really what's going on. Read the story through put on a different pair of glasses. God takes the Jewish people who are spiritually at a totally low place. And he brings them to Mount Sinai. And he says, I love you so, so much. Think about it. Let's use a human relationship, right? One spouse is just really in a dark place. They've really not been healthy. And the other spouse comes and says, listen, darling, listen, honey, we're keeping it gender neutral. I love you so, so much. I want to spend every waking moment with you. I just want to be with you. You're everything to me. You're amazing. You're awesome. I love you. Everything, my whole life is about you. Observing this situation, you might say, oh my gosh, if he or she don't respond favorably, this relationship is toast. Would that be a harsh statement? I don't know. I think it would be a very honest statement. And that's basically what's happening here. God is saying, I love you so much. And we have no choice but to respond. Because if we can't respond that way, that means we're totally disconnected from anything of any value, which, by the way, sometimes people are. Sometimes people are in such a dark place that in that intervention that we spoke about before, they don't respond favorably. But that's because they're disconnected. That's a really, really painful and dark place that sometimes it really feels like there's no hope. Is this helpful? You know, I think that we live in such enlightened times, like really authentically enlightened times, meaning we have such a profound, and I don't mean just, I mean the science in the world, the brain understanding, understanding the human condition, bringing that into merge with Torah's understanding. We have to shed. We have so much. We have baggage. You know, we've been in exile for so long, like the Jewish people in Egypt, that we hear things. Our natural dispensation is to hear things negatively, and I'm guilty of this too. In other words, when we hear this medrash, we only use exile ears to hear what it said. But if we pause and we look deeper, we can reread it with a totally different set of eyes, right? It's such a gift that we have today, and it's understandable. But if you know, even in the world that I grew up in, which was a loving Chabad world, we've also evolved, and it's a gift of the time that to look at, you know, the way I'll give you a simple thing. This is like a passionate idea of that's not idea of mine, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. They in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, right? He's the founder of Chabad philosophy. He talks about the idea of moyach shalit al halev, the mind controlling the heart, right? So what does that mean to you? The mind controls the heart.
Rise above emotions.
Yeah. So you can rise above the emotions. That would be the simple understanding of it. And that's how we were taught. Maybe not as sweet and nice as you just said it, but it was like, you have a temptation, you can control it. You're better. You're bigger than that. Your heart doesn't control you. I want to flip the thinking based on the understanding we have today. The mind can educate the heart. In other words, when you have a temptation for something, an emotion rises. Using our analogy we gave before of using the particular therapy that's current IFS, internal family systems. When an emotion rises, so the old school was, no, shut it down. Right? There's you can look this up on YouTube. I forget the name of the clip, but just Google "shut it down." Right? The experience. It's a clip from some old TV show. You know, some people come into the doctor, the therapist, and you know, I have a problem with my mother. Shut it down. And then the mother comes in and says, shut it down. I have a problem with my husband. Shut it down. The whole family's in the room. Shut it down. Stuff your feelings down, you know, all the way down to your feet. Just no feelings. That's control, right? That's the real man, is the one who stuffs his feelings down. That's not healthy. That's very old thinking, and understood. There was a world where you couldn't afford to have feelings. I mean, you know, as a people, first of all, it's not just as a Jewish people, but society did not have the luxury that we have today. And unfortunately, in some places in the world, you know, I want to tell you something fast. Okay, I'm totally off kilter here, but you listen to some of these hostages that came out of Gaza, and listen to what they're talking about, how they navigated what they went through. it's a gift of the times that they were able to process what they were experiencing the way they did. That they 100 years ago, they couldn't have done that. They didn't have the tools. They would have been in a very deep, they would have to just fall on some place in deep faith. But here they're talking. They understood what they needed to do. They understood that if they were going to survive this, they had to process the experience in real time in a certain way. It's like unbelievable. So the idea of the mind controlling the heart is not to stuff down our feelings. It's to, and neither is it to let the feelings run wild. That's animalistic. But it's to understand that this is part of the picture. So if a feeling comes up, I have the ability to have a conversation with that feeling. I'm in control of what happens. I'm in control of how the story plays out. That's the messaging. Doesn't mean to discount a feeling. Feeling's coming from somewhere. The feeling is part of God's orchestration of your experience. So if you're going to heal from it, you got to talk to the feeling. You got to know where it's coming from. And by the way, if you can talk to the feeling, you actually gain more control ultimately. Because the next time the feeling comes up, you're already familiar with what it is and you understand where it's coming from and you know how to navigate it, as opposed to just stuffing it down. So that's the gift of our time, is the ability to be able to understand things from a deeper experience. By the way, the Rebbe in his last discourse that he edited and distributed before he had a stroke in 92, this was the point of the Rebbe's discourse. The Rebbe's discourse says that our time, our yearning for the divine presence in this world, our yearning for Mashiach should not be coming from a place of darkness anymore. The old story was that we got squeezed into it, right? Now we live in a time of expansiveness. And the point is we have to use our expansiveness to recognize that even in our expansiveness, the world is not complete. In other words, that means we have to take the totality of our experience, our feelings, we got to bring all of that in. All of us needs to recognize that as good as life might be, God's revelation is concealed. That was a long tangent. Yes.
Two questions. One is, just to clarify the bigger picture, the Mashiach, is it a person that's coming, or is it a unity of consciousness in the world? What is it?
Mashiach is a person. That's a fundamental principle of our faith, but it's not about the person. It's about the era, the transformative era that Mashiach ushers in. And what is it at its core? It's just changing the frequency, right? Our frequency now is we see the physicality first. We see ourselves first. We spoke about this earlier. You wake up in the morning, your first consciousness is self. Imagine if you woke up in the morning and before you thought about yourself, your consciousness was of the divine. You woke up in the morning and said, "Good morning, God. I feel you. I experience you. What's on our agenda for today?" Right? Imagine that. Instead of waking up in the morning and I got to the bathroom, my breath is bad. Oh my gosh, what stresses await me today? You know, oh, I'm here for a purpose. Oh, yes, I remember, God. Moda ani, thank you for restoring my soul. Let's see how I can make this day a meaningful day. Mashiach brings a change in frequency. That's why the Maimonides and the prophets, and Maimonides articulates this, that when Mashiach comes, famine will be eliminated, war will be eliminated. According to Maimonides, it's a result of a divine consciousness. It's not, there's no miracle that suddenly war stops. If all of humanity sees the presence of the divine, there's nothing to fight about. And there's no reason for famine. Famine is a consequence of not kosher behavior, right? So when people are in touch with the divine, everybody behaves in alignment. And the result is that the world's a perfect place.
Like, yeah, in this context, not only like boxed in with the Jewish tradition, but it can affect the whole world.
Yes. Yeah. The Rambam closes out, Maimonides closes out his 14 volumes with it says that in that time, in the era of the Mashiach, the occupation of all of humanity will be to know God alone. That's what everybody's going to do. We're going to be invested in knowing God. And he quotes a verse from the prophets that says that that the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, like the water covers the sea. In other words, that's what humanity is going to be invested in divine knowledge. It's the ultimate of utopia. It's the real utopia. It's not fantasy. It's real.
So back to what we were talking about, like in this lesson today, is it like, oh, you do the mitzvah whether you feel like it or not. Like today I might not, well, should I do this? Your heart is not like, oh, I totally just want to do this for the commandments and God's will and stuff. You're like, I don't feel like it, but you still do it. You're like, it's like your head is. Some people, it's like a feeling, you don't care about it, but you still do it.
Right. So today, right, what you're asking is that in the Messianic era, does it come naturally to us to serve God, to want to do what God, not just to serve God, but to do what God wants? And the answer is that's exactly the distinction, right? Right now, what occupies our consciousness is the self. So if we intellectually, or even emotionally, spiritually, understand that we are here to serve, so what we do is we force ourselves, and depends on what it is and depends on the day, will determine how much we have to force ourselves, right? If you're, I've spoken about this idea many times that in AA, in the recovery community, there's something fundamental. Besides attending your AA meetings, you also have to engage in a spiritual practice, right? Think about it. If you're constantly doing spiritual things, you get up in the morning, you meditate. You get up in the morning, you pray. You commit to doing a certain number of acts of kindness. You reach out to somebody who's in need, right? You study Torah. You kiss the mezuzah on your way out the door, right? You say blessings before you eat. If you're doing that stuff all day, you're naturally thinking about God very often, which means it's harder to think about yourself when you're thinking about God. You don't take up as much space when we're not doing that stuff, so we take up more space. And it's a journey. We don't, nobody stays on a equal footing all the time. When Mashiach comes, we don't have to compel ourselves to do anything, because that is who are we in truth? Who are we in our essence? In our essence, we are a soul. And even our body is constantly being energized by the divine. So it's not a struggle. It just comes naturally to us. We do exactly what we're wired to do inherently. So that's what I'm saying, is when Mashiach comes, the frequency changes. Our consciousness becomes a divine consciousness. All right. Everybody have an amazing week. I'm not sure yet about next week if we're going to be upstairs or downstairs.